Hello everybody, so this video here is kind of getting into this second chapter inside this intro to coding unit on the programming digital media course. And this idea is all about computers being able to do stuff based on a set of parameters that we give them. We're, having, it says making choices. It's not really making choices, it's more like following instructions. We're making the choices, and the computers are just running this test that we're going to make in order to do something. But let's not get ahead of ourselves just yet. I want to introduce us real quick to the idea of some relational expressions and operators and things like that that we can type into our code. And these are fairly similar to what you might see in a math class. I need to re-render my website a little bit. So we have things like if something is greater than something else, if something is less than something else, is equal to, that's three equal signs right there, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, or not equal to. So when we're typing in our code, when we start typing in values, we can say if thing on the left is greater than thing on the right, then I want the computer to do something. Okay, so we can kind of build several tests to play around with that. I won't be getting into it in this video, but we can also kind of build multiple tests and say, if this thing happens and this thing happens, then I want you to do something, computer. Or if we can use these symbols and chain together multiple operators from up here in this chart and say, all right, if something happens or this happens, do this thing, computer, and build much more complex tests. But we'll get into that in another video. We're just going to do kind of the basic level test for now. And that is what's called an if statement. I'm just for now going through the book because I really like some of these diagrams here. And this is the idea of having a single test with a single result. Okay? So when we are typing in our code, this is kind of a graphic representing what's going to happen. We're going to have our test here, and that's I'll get into how we type this out later, but it's either going to be the test is going to come back true and then the computer is going to do something, or it's going to come back false and the computer is not going to do something. That's really all it boils down to. It's either true or false. So we have this Boolean data that I mentioned in some of the system variables video. So it's either yes or no. Is something related to something else? And if that relationship is true, do the thing. Okay, so the way we go about that is we can type in our code here, we say the word if, and then we have a specific test that we want to have run, test. And then if it's true, we put in our braces the code we want our computer to do if the test is true. So we have that there. All right, so there's a few more diagrams and some more complex tests we can get into, but let's go into the code real quick. So I've put a few basic operators here in the comments. Again, this code will be available for anyone who wants to duplicate it. Just follow the link in the description. But let's make a basic test. All right, so we'll start with if, and you'll notice that turns yellow, indicating that we have something new block of code, and we're doing if. So if, and then you need our parentheses, and then an open and close brace for this. So again, in the parentheses, that's where the test we want to type will go. So if, let's say, if 5 is greater than 3. We'll start off simple. We'll do this. I'm going to type out a line here and say text. Let's make sure I get the order of this correct. Let's see. Yes, 5 is greater than 3. And we'll put it there on the screen. All right. So I've run this code, and so I've got this line here, this function that's saying, hey, type this text at this spot, but we're only going to type it if the number 5 happens to be greater than the number 3. If I were to change this operator to be if 5 is less than 3 and rerun the code, now the text on the screen disappears because 5 is not less than 3. So we have that going on. So whatever you type in these braces here will only happen if the test that you create in the parentheses is true. Okay, so let's do something a little bit with some variables a bit. So I'm going to comment out I don't know what, I'll change my mind. I'm going to leave this. And let's say if, let's bring back some system variables. If mouse x is not equal to 100. All right, so this will be an interesting test. We're going to say background. Let's see, I'm kind of live doing this. Let's see if this works. Is going to be blue. All right, so I've got this set up here. So we have our message, yes, 5 is greater than 3. It's always good to be reminded of that. And then I have this test, if the mouse is not equal to 100, then we're going to set the background value to be blue. I'm actually going to make that light blue, so it's just a little easier on the eyes. Right, light blue. So now I have our mouse here, and let's add another line in here and say console.log mouse x. And oop, I went one too far. I need to put it inside of this, inside of the draw function brace. If you click next to that brace, you see we are still, everything is inside of the draw function. So I had it outside of there. It was like having my couch halfway through the wall, or my toilet in the backyard. It doesn't quite work out, so I needed to move my couch back into the living room. There, so console.log in the draw function. Now our console is constantly monitoring what that mouse x variable is. So if I take my mouse and I slowly move it across the x axis, oop, and I passed it. I'm gonna try and get there. There we are. I'm right on the 100 point. So now, because our test is if the mouse x is not equal to 100, we're going to do the things. But since it now currently is, as we can see in the console, the background goes back to the default kind of light gray color, and then that text disappears. But as soon as I move it elsewhere, we have our little yes, 5 is greater than 3 message, and the background changes. All right, let's get a little more interactive thing going. Might be a little easier to understand with this other one. So let's say if mouse x is, let's see, we'll say if it's greater than or equal to 200, it's going to be light blue. And then I'll make another test and say if mouse y is greater than or equal to 200, let's make background be assigned, let's go yellow. All right, so we got yellow and light blue, as well as our additional values. So now I have the canvas here, and if we move it across the x-axis to the point where it's greater than 200, you'll see that it changes from the light gray, the kind of off gray, to the light blue. Then as I move it down, it sets it to the yellow once it passes that halfway point. So boom, 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 boom. So we've just set up these tests here to see, is this value on the left, we're going to compare it to the value on the right. And depending on what that comparison is, if it is true, then the computer will do whatever you tell it to in the brace. Otherwise, your computer will just ignore it and move on to the next thing in the code. So every time the draw function happens, it's going to run the test. So whenever our computer starts up and starts running this code, it's going to do the setup function. It's going to make the canvas. Then it's going to start running draw over and over and over and over again. So the background is going to be set to the off white color here, and then it's going to say, "Hey, computer, what is mouse X position? Is it greater than or equal to 200? If so, then it's going to do the next code. Otherwise, it's going to go on to the next test, and then the program will say, "Hey, computer, what's the mouse Y variable? Is it greater than or equal to 200? If so, we're going to make this yellow. If not, then it's just going to go on to the next thing, which in this case is just console logging the mouse X position. We can actually say mouse Y as well. So now we can see both of those. So let's get that. So you can use any number or any variable inside of your tests. All right, so you can compare two different things, two different variables, system variables and numbers, Boolean things, so yes or no's. So if I go to, let's say, if, I'm just going to type out, I usually like to type out the kind of skeleton of what I'm doing here, just so I know, all right, I've got my if statement. I know I've already typed in my parentheses, and I know I've already typed in my braces. That way I don't accidentally mess up, and everything has its pair. So let's say if the mouse is pressed is equal to true, then we're going to do something. And I'm just going to add mouse is pressed to our thing here. So just as a reminder, mouse is pressed is a value that only stores true or false. So this is what's called Boolean data. It's just true or false, yes or no, 1 or 0, things like that. So there's no other values that mouse is pressed can store. So you can't have a test that says, if mouse is pressed is greater than mouse X or something like this. You won't get an error when you type out a test like this. However, anything you type in here will just never be executed because mouse is pressed will never have a value other than true or false. So your computer will never pass this test. So you technically could have something like this, but it won't work. So that's why I'm going to leave this back to mouse is pressed is equal to true. And then we're going to do something. So let's say I'm going to put an ellipse. And I'm going to say the width divided by 2, height divided by 2. I'll make it a fairly big circle. Let's set the fill to, that's not a color, orange. All right. So I've got this here. So I've got this set to where we have the fill is being set to orange, and we have an ellipse, but it's inside of the result block for this if statement. So if mouse is pressed is equal to true, then set the fill to orange and draw the ellipse. You can see in our console.log that mouse is pressed is currently set to false. So if I move over into the canvas here and I click, You can now see in the console that the mouse is pressed variable is now set to true. And as long as I'm holding this down, that variable is going to stay as true. So every time the draw function is looping, it's going to say, hey, what is mouse is pressed? Is it equal to true? Oh, it is? Okay, now we're going to set the fill to orange, draw the ellipse. As soon as I let go, it goes away because now we've set that value to false. All right, and actually I'm going to do a little thing real quick. I'm going to do one more little test with the mouse, but I figure it might make it a little easier if you all can kind of see where I'm clicking. All right. So I've got that there. So let's do one more with the mouse. So I mentioned we kind of have one result, one test and one result. You can kind of pair these together and have multiple things happening in one test. So I'm just going to introduce that, but I won't go too crazy. All right. So let's go on line 22, and we'll just say if, let's see, if I'll do mouse is pressed again. And my cursor was not in the right spot. Let's just fix that. There we are. If mouse is pressed is equal to true. And we're going to type in 2 ampersands. So, and mouse x, not is, we'll say, less than 200. Then we'll say rect, and we'll say, I don't know, 100, 100, 50, comma 50. All right. So I just made a simple one there. Let's make it a different color. All right. Cool. So now we've got a few different tests going on. All right. So I've just kind of mentioned that now you can, we have these here where it's just one test. Is mouse X greater than or equal to 200? If so, do the thing. If mouse Y is greater than or equal to 200. If so, do the thing. If mouse is pressed is equal to true, do this. If mouse is pressed is equal to true, and mouse X is less than 200, then do the thing. In this case, now there are 2 sets of criteria for this test to pass. So just if the mouse is pressed, we may not get the, we're not going to get the circle unless we're also in mouse X is less than 200. So as soon as I move past that halfway point, I'm still holding down the mouse, but because that second criteria is not met, that rectangle, that square, is now going away as soon as one of those is not met. If I were to change this to these 2 vertical lines, which generally it's the shift button and then the button right above the enter key on your keyboard, that means or. So if either one of these is true, then we're going to see the pink square. So right now, we see this because the mouse X here is 0, as we can see in our console. And then as soon as I move it across the screen, once I pass that halfway point, it goes away. All right, so it's not there because neither the mouse X is, the mouse X is now currently greater than 200, and the mouse is pressed is not equal to true. If I click the mouse, then everything pops up right now because the mouse is true test that's on line 17 is passing, as well as the one on line 22. All right, so we have that there. I'm going to put this back to and for now. So we get that there. So you'll notice that some of these tests are fairly similar. And as we get into another video with some more kind of advanced ways to build these tests and make them a little more sophisticated, a little more, I'll say complex, but just kind of building these tests with multiple sets of conditions, multiple different outcomes with do this thing, but then if A doesn't work, then do B, and then if B doesn't work, run a whole other test with its own A and B. We'll get into that in other videos, and I'll show you all how to make tests that are just a little more compact, easier to read, easier to understand. But if you want to check that out in this page that I referenced at the beginning of the video, there are some, again, diagrams and code examples of all the things that we're going to get into. So if you just completely understood everything I mentioned in this video, feel free to check this out. Again, that's the link to the main textbook page is in the description of the video. And then this chapter is the computers making choices conditionals in that intro to coding unit. So I've that right there. So there we are. So I guess if you want to get a little more practice before I sign off for this video, just build some extra tests, play around with the different operators. I showed you a few of them in action here, but there's some more as well. Try combining your tests into one with the and or operator, and just just see what you can do. Does something work when you weren't expecting it, or does something not work when you thought it would? And just play around and see where you can go with that. So with that, I'm going to sign off for this video. So have a nice day, and I will see you in the next